Well, just talking about the backdrop on the business side, the East Asia really led the world growth at one point in time, and it was over decades with Japan, and then the tiger economies, and more recently, of course, China. And the region also very well leveraged external integration, technology and innovation, transport connectivities, and it was able to establish robust global value chains. Further, it has been quite proactive in entering into free trade agreements. India has been able to engage itself into a large number of free trade in this region, and including the RCEP. Now, South Asia is emerging as a strong growth pole for global economy. And India is amongst them the largest economy. We are growing at about 7.5% with a $2 trillion plus GDP. And we are seeing quite a few other economies coming on to a high growth path like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and more external orientation, more reforms taking place. And according to the Asia Development Bank, if one can quote them, East Asia's growth will come down to around 5.7% in 2016, led by moderation in China. And at the same time, the ADB believes that South Asia will be the fastest growing region in developing Asia, with 7.3% growth in 2017. And that's, of course, primarily because of the type of growth that one is seeing in India. The potential for greater synergy between these two regions are obviously very high given this background. And we see also a great advantage in the demographies of the two regions. One, very young population in South Asia, and we have a declining workforce also in East Asia, and that's also, we are going to derive a lot of complementarities out of that. Further, the competitive advantage of South Asia really derives from a continued low-cost structure and rising disposable incomes and growing market, better education, skill outcomes, increased spending on human development, and all this combined to present an attractive trade and investment opportunities also for both the regions. And there are also, we see the Bay of Bengal initiative, the BIMSTEC, and which really envisages a very strong collaboration and cooperation between Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. And we also have given the SAFTA, which has been in force for quite some time, and which has evolved pretty strongly. We also need to, of course, look beyond this in terms of a more comprehensive aspect of trade in goods, trade in services, and also mutual investments to drive greater integration between both the regions. And we'll look at institutional linkages on the business side, fostering basically key issues of global concerns, some of it which I mentioned, be it energy, skill development, people-to-people linkages, etc. So these are some of the thoughts basically to put in background as to what could be the type of business linkages as we go forward, and how do we foster the business linkages between our two regions. So I'll turn the table around and really come to my panelists and request Dr. Narayan to set the ball rolling by his comments and his observations to begin with. And thereafter, I'll come to the other panelists. So once again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming for this session. Dr. Narayan?
Thank you, Chandrajit, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. The advantage in a panel of going first is then at least if the others go first, then you don't have much to say. So now it's the last person would not have much to say, I think. But what I would like to do in this short time that's available is to talk on a just larger framework. I spent a lot of time in Singapore at the National University. And in the last month, the most important thing that I noticed was the visit of the Prime Minister of Singapore to United States, where he made two very, very important statements, and for Singapore, I would say a little unusually strong statement. Singapore doesn't believe in strong statements, and he said two things in two different occasions. One, he said that the TPP, is extremely important for Southeast Asia. And in a way, he was telling the new candidates for the US presidency, actually, he used the words that if the TPP does not happen, you will lose a lot of friends in Asia. These are the words he used, which perhaps outlines the kind of concern, and I'll come to the concern in a brief, in a little while. The second important thing that he said, again, stating a position, is that Singapore is a small country very much dependent on maritime trade and free passage in the ocean. And therefore, everybody must follow the law, the international law of the ocean. Again, a very strong statement for Singapore to make in the light of the problems that are occurring in the South China Seas. And certainly this statement was not very much appreciated by PRC, by the People's Republic of China, because China has been for many, many years the base on which Singapore and Singapore economy and the trade of Singapore has grown. So in order to make this statement, one can see that there are some absolutely tectonic shifts that are happening in Southeast Asia. I mean, Japan will be talked about separately, and India will be talked about separately. And the shifts are happening in terms of the trade changes that are happening. And similar changes are happening in South Asia as well. And I'll just mention a few of them. With the slowing down of China and the advantages of Singapore, as well as the Southeast Asian value chain, including South China value chains, in energizing trade and putting trade together, has certainly come down in the last couple of years. Singapore at the moment is flat in the sense that technically you could say they are in a recession, but perhaps they are kind of telling us that it may be 0.5% or 1% growth. And they do not see what's going to happen in the next few years. The growth engine there is Vietnam, which is growing significantly well, internal consumption as well as external trade. But that trade doesn't necessarily pass through Singapore. Passes through Singapore, doesn't necessarily benefit Singapore. Malaysia is slowing down. Cambodia is very much dependent on Chinese aid for infrastructure, roads. Myanmar is, of course, today, I would say, the hot thing. Everybody wants to get into Myanmar. But that investment to convert into international trade, into Southeast Asian trade, or into South Asian, Southeast Asian trade is going to take a while. So what is Singapore trying to do? Singapore is trying to, as a policy, they are moving away from this structure and trying to get into innovation, technology, and totally into the frontier of a totally different kind of manufacturing services, goods and services model, where they are trying to bring in all the, I would say, things like artificial intelligence, things like virtual reality, 3D manufacturing, etc., into that in order to create a new model of technological growth and development. Will it work? Will it not work? I don't think even Singapore itself knows. So if you sit in South Asia and look at these changes which are happening in Southeast Asia, 2 or 3 points stand out. One is that we wonder whether actually we are, from South Asia, understanding the change in the game in trade that is happening. Or are we going along just the traditional path of more manufacturing, relying on goods and services, end-to-end value chain within the country, little reliance on neighborhood strengths in order to improve the value chains. Interdependencies of trade, let us say even between India and Sri Lanka, India and Bangladesh, still very low. So, are we reading the science right is the first question that I would like to pose here. Second is that, interestingly, both Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are moving along in a particular path which is independent, self-contained, and probably sustainable. Today, Bangladesh is the third largest exporter of garment, and its garment even if it loses the special preferences of the least developed nation, it would continue to do well. Currency stable, inflation stable, social indicators excellent, much better than India. Short of energy, but Indian firms are starting to invest there. So here is possibly a growth engine. Sri Lanka also growing extremely well. Now that those ports, both the Hambantota as well as the Colombo ports, would be modernized, I think you'll see a lot of traffic passing through here. In fact, a lot of de-stuffing of containers for India might well happen in Colombo and then come to Kochi or Madras or whatever. So again, Pakistan getting increasingly dependent, huge investment happening by China on the energy side. That OROP is going to make a difference to Pakistan, not necessarily to India. So I think in South Asia, perhaps it's important for South Asia to, and particularly India, to stand back and see that is the trade game changing? And if the trade game changes, what are the changes that India needs to make in order to be part of the game and not get left out? And I would, my 6 minutes are over, so I will leave it with that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Narayan. I'll now turn to Dr. Naushad Forbes, the co-chairman of Forbes Marshal, and also the president of CII for this year.
I was wondering if you were going to mention the CII role, Chandrajit. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you at this conference. I have to say that looking through the program, I was impressed with the richness and the breadth of the topics. And I noticed that this is the one session where we're going to talk about business. So let me give you a little background about us as a company, about what we do as a South Asian company in Southeast Asia, and one comment on the potential and one challenge that we face as a company. So a little background on us. We're a third-generation family business. We're about 1,500 people, about $200 million in turnover. We do steam engineering and control instrumentation products, a fairly wide range of products. We help customers save energy, increase throughput, and to run a clean and safe factory. We have a leading position in India, which we've established over the last 70 years. And we have been increasingly active now in international markets. So far, only about a fifth of our total business comes from outside of India. Our goal is to raise that proportion to over half in the next 5 years. Where we have offices in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and we're in the process of setting up operations in Myanmar and Vietnam as well. What's the potential that we've seen as we've tried to expand our operations in Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand? First, we've been struck by the potential in the market. We believe that over the next 5 years, between Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, we could get the same level of business that we currently get from India. So we could, as a company, pretty close to double by being much more actively involved in these markets. We find all of these countries both welcoming and easy places to do business, and we enjoy being in those countries. We find actually that the markets are less price sensitive than India, and are, if anything, very interested in receiving solutions that are high quality and that can improve their own processes. What's the one challenge that we face? Well, as a company which is medium-sized, 1,500 people, and still 80% centered in India, we struggle with learning how to manage non-Indians. We think, how to manage Indians very well, but we struggle to manage non-Indians. And if you wish to, we can get into a discussion of what that actually means later on. I'll add one comment from my CI perspective. In CI, we believe that Indian firms have great potential to be much more active overseas. Indian industry has been fairly inward-looking, consistent with our inward-looking policies and our policy stance that was import substituting and inward-looking for too many years. As the stance has changed, as India started looking out, so too must Indian industry, and much more so than we do now. In CI, we have the goal of fostering the creation, we first think of 100 multinationals with Indian roots, and then going to 1,000 multinationals with Indian roots over the next few years. Our ambition is to see how we can facilitate this process by opening offices in different emerging markets and enabling Indian industry to have a stronger local connect with business in each of these countries. We think the potential is really enormous. The potential to be good citizens in each of the countries in which we operate, and the potential to make a positive contribution to both the Indian market and to the markets in which we operate. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Naushad, and thanks for bringing in the perspective of both how your company is seeing, how your firm is seeing the region and beyond in the East Asia, as well as the perspective of what, as an institution, CII would be looking forward in terms of integrating and working with both the regions. I now invite Mr. Bharat Kaushal, the chairman in India and of the Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation, to give his perspective.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Banerjee. I think, first of all, it's a challenge to be amidst eminent experts on this subject, because I have no claim to be being one. But it was very insightful to hear Dr. Forbes talk about an experience of Indian industry going all across Asia successfully. And my learnings are based on somewhat an experiment that I myself am of leading an East Asian megabank in the South Asian region. I am maybe sometimes wanting to categorize my experiences only for Japan and India, but on most occasions they are relevant when you look at the whole situation of East Asia and its impact on the economic engagement with the entire South Asian region. I think when people talk about economic engagement, the issue is about compatibility. And in banks, you become commercial gateways of making products within the thought of economic engagement. So the experience is a little bit more diverse. It is a larger canvas of sectors that you get to see and understand which areas are more important to play in. When you look at the common sense of economic engagement, say typically with Japan, where I know much more, the long-term capital, the technology, the trust and goodwill, and besides the geostrategic initiative to deal with the tentativeness of the global markets, India and the might of an Indian economy seems to make huge amount of sense. And where India is, I think we desperately need in a family unit type of society where intergenerational transfers are higher, where savings are higher, and therefore interest rates are higher. The long-term money is a huge differentiator in how you welcome these economies' engagement into your economy. Of course, you need now to transform the way you look out at building, say, infrastructure and manufacturing specifically, from building it for yesterday where demands existed to tomorrow where newer next generation tools are required. In entire East Asian region, first for infrastructure, the generation still lives to see the transition that they have been through of being a developing country into a developed economic superpower. And we are going through that kind of a situation of building our infrastructure. We need their help, not just in talking about corridors and about the potential of supply chain and logistics and so on, but to understand how life cycle costs are embedded in markets which are challenged with emerging market type of capital and attraction. When you look at manufacturing, you need a lot of those best practices to augment manufacturing. One Japanese company in the automotive sector said to me, Bharat-san, 99 is not 100. And that's the principle across skill development, across manufacturing, supply chain perfections, and so on. When East Asia transformed Southeast Asia, they were almost dovetailed at the same time in building capacities for the world. If the median was 1985, then maybe 1985 you were building capacities, very competitive capacities, for 6 billion people. And now when you make the choice of building capacities in a South Asian region and increase the share of manufacturing for your own market, you have the challenge of shelf life across various domains of manufacturing, which need to be amortized within a shorter span before the onslaught of robotics takes place. So you need to maybe imagine how quickly and how much of manufacturing at what level do you want to use here, because the rest of the capacity created over the world can very easily dump and bring down the competitive prices. The other challenge that we have is that the service sector in the South Asian region has a much larger component of contribution to economic growth. And manufacturing-wise, import as an input into manufacture of export is extremely low. Take the case of India, where maybe large part of the import is petroleum products and export is gems and jewelry and IT, which is not the case of trade-driven economies where they supplemented the building and augmenting of capacities for the East Asian countries and the East Asian tigers and then Southeast Asia. Everything just made one harmonious story. And the other bit is about bringing predictability. I mean, in the case of India, it's a noisy democracy. You will want to have systems which are more transparent and therefore sometimes be ignoring the practices that are deemed as best practices. But you need to make products out of the plans and projects that you make, because ultimately, from a cultural perspective of comfort, South Asia is not always Asia. It's sort of made differently in the mental makeup. So the kind of discipline that you're used to in Asian countries is somewhat differently construed here, and there's a population pressure which makes more quick fix solutions in the interregnum, and therefore the whole evolution process is differently defined. And so for many of the Asian big powers, it becomes challenging to call it product ready. On the infrastructure side, the diversity is between a Japan which may be enjoying a whole lot of trust in markets even outside metros from a consumer product perspective, to being branded as sometimes slow and expensive, being outsmarted 30-40% in any bidding process, to a Korean economy coming into India with a little bit of an high quality but more accommodation, to a Chinese who will, say, dominate 60% of the power sector bidding and maybe 80% of the telecom equipment bidding. So what I'm sharing with you is that there is a lot of effort and work going on. There is more requirement to make smooth products out of this very powerful and natural economic engagement. And I thought that maybe just by sharing what I have seen in 20 years at Sumitomo Mitsui Bank, and before that as an economist with the IMF, I have been able to make my own little story, and I have shared that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharat. And I'll now turn to Professor Abhijit Das from the Center for WTO Studies, IIFT.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. And at the outset, let me express my gratitude to the organizers for providing me this platform. I shall spend the next few minutes looking at three broad points. I will start from where Dr. Narayan left. Is the trade game changing? Yes, certainly the trade game is changing. Is India prepared? No, India is not adequately prepared. Simple reason. The trade game is changing primarily because of global value chains' emergence and predominance. Where is India in global value chains? Rather low. What can India do, and how can East Asia help? I have 2 or 3 suggestions on that. Our primary focus in India as far as global value chains has been our preoccupation with the manufacturing segment. We in India have really not focused on the services segment of the global value chains. That's where, let's say, if we were to focus on the design aspect, something which is perhaps emerging gradually in the auto sector, if we were to focus more on the design aspects or the services aspects in global value chains, maybe we might climb up the ladder of functional upgradation and maybe get better integrated into global value chains and also garner higher incomes in distribution of the gains in global value chains. How can this be done? Not easy, but certainly East Asia does provide some very good examples. Malaysia comes immediately to my mind. Malaysia used to be a hub of textiles and clothing production, but no longer. It has graduated, it's moved up the value chain, and it's doing services that are very integral to the global value chain in the sector, but not manufacturing. Can India learn lessons from Malaysia? I'm sure there are possibilities. Continuing on this thought process, Bharat talked of best practices. And where can Indian business acquire or find best practices, if not in the Asia-Pacific region? And what better option than India contemplating joining APEC? That certainly is something which the Indian business and the Indian policymakers certainly need to think about on very serious lines. But of course, what needs to be borne in mind is that India's membership to APEC should not end up providing shackles on the policy making of the government, keeping its development priorities in mind. So having looked at trade, let me look at a bit on the planet. What can South Asia and East Asia do together to conserve the planet, to make life better for its citizens? If we look at the mega biodiverse regions in the world, out of the 17 mega biodiverse countries, Asia hosts 5 of these. And what is the importance of these mega biodiverse regions for business? Many of these mega biodiverse regions are rich in cultural traditions, traditional knowledge, which provides the basis for patents world over. But unfortunately, there is no international instrument whereby the local communities can benefit from these patents. So perhaps there's a need for a greater cooperation among South Asia and Eastern Asia to see how best this problem of biopiracy can be jointly addressed. Can we have a stronger regime than what is currently contained in something called the Nagoya Protocol? That could be the second area where businesses in Asia could really benefit from closer cooperation. My third point is that we've looked at our pockets from the trade perspective. We've tried to preserve the planet. What about our soul itself? Bharat mentioned that South Asia is not East Asia. There's a lot of difference, but there's also a lot of South Asia in East Asia. I allude to Buddhism. We've heard in many conferences how Buddhist tourism can be enhanced, but on the ground, really very, very little has happened. What we really need to make this a reality is transformative investment, perhaps from Japan, Korea, Singapore, etc., to make Buddhist tourism a reality, whereby there could be investments in hotels, in transportation services, tourism services, so on and so forth. That certainly would bring people closer together. That would certainly be very good for the business, and that would certainly be very good for our souls as well. So I shall stop at that and look forward to some questions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, once again for your very kind attention.
Thank you. This was another great perspective on trade and integration. I must thank all the four panelists for really sticking on to time so very meticulously, giving a scope to really throw open this session to questions or comments. It's open for anyone from the floor to really make a comment or ask a question. If it's to any specific panelists, do let us know that.
And I would be interested if anybody would want to comment on that. I believe the policy is you need to have you're allowed 51% foreign ownership, but big reputable retailers will not come into India because that is still relatively restrictive. And what does this policy relate today to new thinking in India and to development issues generally?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyone else? Please, we'll take a few questions and then we will. Yes, please. May I?
Hello. Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my question is, you were mentioning about the manufacturing sector in India doing good. I'm just wondering if, how is your infrastructure sector doing good? Are you investing in it? You have a very wide and huge land here, and it's, I think, about time that you also have, skyscrapers here, maybe someday, high-end buildings also. And the other one is, how is your population now being controlled? Knowing that you're competing with China. Yes, the most populous nation in the world. That's all. Thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Dr. Forbes could expand the managing non-Indians a little bit. Thank you.
Specifically to you. One last one before we turn to the panel. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just make a point in that case. I got a computer in my lap, that's why I was a bit hesitating to stand. I just want the panel to recognize that, following on Dr. Narayan's remarks, where he spoke about roboticization and automation and all that, it's these changes are happening at such a swift pace. I don't think India is quite cottoned onto it yet. If you look at the import data of countries like Myanmar and Indonesia, you see how much automation equipment is getting there. China has been the #1 importer of robotics for the last 3 years. These changes are going to make that region intensely more competitive than India. But if you look at Indian trade patterns with Southeast Asia, it's quite dismal. 2014, the trade with ASEAN was 67 billion. The target was 100 billion by 2015. The actual number in 2015 was, 58 billion, which was actually 9 billion less than the previous year. There's a lot that India has to do, particularly at the government level, to shed its inhibitions for trade. And if you don't do that, there's going to be a disconnect between your strategic ambitions in that region versus the actual flesh on the bones. Thank you.
Let me now turn to the panel with those 5 really comments and questions that we have. Yes, Professor Das, you would like to take the entire issue of reforms in India, especially the issue of retail that was focused on.
I'm not too competent to speak on many of those issues, but let me try my hand at some of them. Let me start with the last one. India should shed its inhibitions on trade so as to meet its political ambitions. Yes, you're absolutely right, but before India does that, it's important to recognize why there are inhibitions on trade. And you've given the answer yourself, or one of the participants. It's really the infrastructure problems. We've been looking at trade costs in India, comparing it with other countries. The trade costs in India are dismally high, and a major part of that goes back to the very abysmal infrastructure. Till we improve that, I do not foresee a situation where India will be shedding off its inhibitions on trade. On manufacturing sector, yes, as I said, we do need to do a lot in terms of improving the infrastructure, where I'm sure the government would more than welcome foreign investment. And as far as population goes, 40 years back when I was in high school, I was told that, well, the burgeoning population will really prove to be a big bane in future. But now, as the demographics change, the same burgeoning population, if harnessed properly, educated properly, skilled properly, can perhaps be a huge bonus for the country. So I really do not look at the burgeoning population as something which will pull the country back. No, the point is, how well do we equip the increasing population with the right skill sets to meet the market demands in future? On retail, certainly there has been a bit of yo-yo type of response from the policy perspective on opening the retail sector. Government could have done much more, but we do need to bear in mind that some of the conditionalities which were put on FDI in retail in terms of back-end domestic procurement, those are gradually being relaxed. So maybe there is hope that we might see a further liberalization in this sector in the future. So let me stop at that at this juncture. Thank you.
Naushad?
So I'll take a couple of them, including the one that was specifically directed at me. A comment on the question on skyscrapers. Why don't you see more skyscrapers? For 2 reasons. One is because of the part of Delhi that you're in, which is what's called Luton's Delhi. And we have this very interesting policy of housing ministers or members of parliament who we pay roughly $30,000 a year to as salaries, and we house them in $50 million homes. This policy ends up keeping Delhi very pleasant, this part of Delhi very pleasant and low-rise. But it's a consequence of that policy more than anything else. More broadly in India, we have an FSI policy, a floor space index policy, that is amongst the most restrictive in the world. We have a typical floor space index in most Indian cities of 1:1. compared, for example, with a floor space index of 10:1 or 20:1 in many of the more densely populated cities in the world. It's something that could very easily transform the real estate sector in cities and create a lot more space, actually, and a lot less congestion than we currently have. It could also do wonders for infrastructure, urban infrastructure. In terms of the question on managing non-Indians, here's what we struggle with. As a company, we do very well with managing Indians. We rank very high in the annual Great Places to Work survey, but when it comes to non-Indians, we're all Indians in the company, or largely all of top management is Indian. And I think only when more and more of us who run the company on a day-to-day basis get exposure internationally, experience, how do I put it? The best way in which you learn how to manage, how you learn how to manage is, regardless of what you learn in college, is by making mistakes. If you actually manage someone so badly that the person leaves, and you learn from that experience, then you've learned how to manage someone better. And you kind of need to go through that process of managing across cultures to learn how to, I think, manage non-Indians. It's a process that we're currently engaged in. For us as a management, what we're trying to do is to expose our senior management to working overseas, and sort of saying that, look, for people who are going to be the future leaders of the business, not the current ones, but the future leaders of the business in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, they should have had some international exposure. So they should have managed one of our companies overseas before they play a bigger role in management at home. That's the way we're trying to address it. But we've not found it easy.
Bharat?
Most of it is addressed very suitably. And yes, I think, of course, Dr. Abhijit talked about going up in the value chain, and one needs to identify jobs in our market which are up in the value chain, rather than, as I said, create more redundancies which will be outsmarted very quickly. To add to competitiveness. I mean, in 70 years of independence, what you call a Bachelor of Engineering and a Master of Engineering, we haven't really got too many Master of Engineering jobs. They are constantly doing Bachelor of Engineering type of jobs. So when it comes to defense offset, when it comes to shipbuilding, carbon fiber, the bullet train, and other high precision engineering stuff, I think it takes up in the ladder to sustain much longer and to be very competitive. The one thing that is happening about India is the rapidity with which a progressive disruption is taking place owing to technology. And to get to the FDI point as well on multi-brand retail, these entire landscape of definitions of middle class being 100 million for Virgin Atlantic and 400 million for Toshiba and maybe 900 million for Pepsi Cola is all getting changed. So the digital divide definition of service sector in India responding to the requirements and getting into the space that is being created. If you follow what the Planning Commission or the Niti Aayog in India now says, 300 million smartphone users are going to become 1 billion smartphone users. I don't know which side of digital divide the 1 billion smartphone users will characteristically be all the time, but there is enough to accommodate everybody in this transition process, but you need to be careful in public policy to respond to it with moving it up on the value chain.
Dr. Narayan.
I think most of the issues have been discussed already. Just a couple of thoughts. On multi-brand retail, as Abhijit pointed out, a lot of relaxation has happened. But I think we should also understand that, with 55 cities in this country with more than 1 million, I can't really imagine 55 Walmarts coming up all over the country. I think a lot of the country will continue to be serviced by local logistics, local retails, and local shops. The reason for that goes back to that other question, is that unless the infrastructure reaches a level where the logistic chains are comparable with international logistic chains, even the large multinational, multi-brand retail shops would find it difficult to meet the costs which are able to be, I would say, considerably met by the local retail chains. The big example here is Reliance, who started their retail foray some 8 or 10 years ago. And if you look at the balance sheet, the contribution that the retail is making to their total profit is absolutely minuscule. They are struggling. And the main thing is, okay, get the infrastructure right, then you'll get the logistics right. You get the logistics right, then you'll be able to bring it to the shop at a cost which is competitive, which is comparable to the rest of the world. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but merely settling the retail end of it to say, all right, 100% FDI is not going to create a breakthrough in the retail chain. Thank you.
We have a few minutes left, and if there are any quick comments or questions, we'll all play it back to the panel once again. Yes, please, madam. Please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you, panelists, for that discussion. I just wanted to ask about India's status on maritime trade, because maritime relations are key when it comes to interacting with all of these countries that you've mentioned. So what is our status there, and where are the gaps? Like what is the status of our ports, and what are the gaps there?
Any quick comment or question? Otherwise, I'll ask the panel to, anybody wants to respond on this question of maritime and our port connectivity. Naushad, yes.
I'll have a shot. I'm being very well trained this year to address questions that I have absolutely no competence to address, thanks to my role in CI. So the question on maritime trade, we struggle with port efficiency in the country. We have several large port developments currently underway, and the present government has actually initiated a major port development program, both seaports and river ports, to improve connectivity within the country and to also improve international connectivity and efficiency of ports. There's a deep sea port coming up in Kerala, which is supposed to be, which we hope will actually play a role that today the port of Colombo plays for a lot of India's seagoing international trade. Today, a lot of our larger cargo gets shipped from some part of India to Colombo, and then from Colombo somewhere else in the world. No good reason why that should happen. There's a need for much more efficient and further and deeper port development. So it's, I think, been taken up for the first time in a very conscious and systematic way, and we're hopeful that in 3 or 4 years we'll see a few ports coming up in different parts of the country, starting with the Vizhinjam port in Kerala, that we hope will be quite transformative. Yeah.
To add one bit is that transshipment is not allowed on Indian coastline still. And that's why 70% of the goods coming for India also land there. And some of the bigger 400 DWT ships don't find sense for evacuation of what Make in India will finally yield to overseas market, even though freight charges are maybe 30%
Yes.
Of the overall delivered cost.
Yes, it's something that we have a position on at CI, where we think that should be freed up and opened up. Yeah.
So it's good to end on time, and I'd like to really say that it was a diverse set of issues. We saw that there is a huge scope from if you really particularly want to look at India, that while there has been a lot of stuff which has been done really over the past few years on reforms, we still need to see how we can look at the entire trade paradigm differently, see how we can integrate more with the world as far as both with this part of the globe, with both South Asia as well as East Asia, and with the rest of the globe, and in terms of how we are going to look at integrating through global value chains into the trade system. We've seen the opening up of India, especially in FDIs, the manufacturing sector. We heard about retail. Yes, the multi-brand retail has been fairly opened up. There are few challenges on the single-brand retail that was also talked about by some of our panelists as to how India is really looking at it. But yes, there is a huge opportunity of complementarities that we see between East Asia and South Asia. India today talks about from a look east to a do east policy, and the type of and the number of free trade agreements that India has really been able to, or even the South Asia has been able to see with East Asia, is quite many. And with RCEP, there will be some movement, of course, on that front, but that does not take away from the fact what some of our panelists very strongly alluded to, that we need a very strong integrated approach towards the entire trade paradigm. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I just would like to thank all of you for participating enthusiastically in this particular session. And we had a great panel, and I would like to really thank the panel for sparing their time and making such very deep observations during the course of this discussion. Thank you.